It was in August of 1924 when a crew of men, clearing the jungle not far from Kuala Lumpur, found something unexpected. Their machines were tearing at the overgrown roots, 3 feet down, when the blades scraped against concrete. It took them the better part of 6 hours to uncover what lay beneath, and when they had finished, the foreman on the site knew he had to contact the Malaysian Ministry of Defense. Under all that growth, which had been left to itself for decades, sat a villa. It was whole, hidden from the world. The way it was built seemed wrong for that part of the country. It was too severe, too much like a fortress. Inside, in what seemed to be the main room, the men who came to investigate found an officer's dress uniform. It was hanging in a closet that had been sealed shut. From the insignia, they could tell it had belonged to a commander in the Imperial Japanese Navy. But it was a framed photograph on a desk that made them all pause. The picture was of the same officer, and he was standing on the bridge of a ship. It was a ship they recognized from photographs of the Battle of Midway, back in June of 1942. According to all the official records, that commander had died when his ship went down in the battle. His name was on the memorial in Tokyo. His family had held a funeral for him 82 years before. The question, then, was how his uniform came to be in a secret villa, 2,000 miles from the place he was supposed to have died. That discovery started an investigation that would change the accepted history of Japanese naval operations in Southeast Asia. To understand how a dead man's uniform ended up in Malaysia, you have to go back to the battle that turned the tide in the Pacific. Commander Takashi Yamamoto was the man in command of the destroyer Ayrshire in June of 1942. He was 38 years old and was thought to be a capable officer in the Navy's destroyer division. He had served for 15 years, a distinguished record that included escorting convoys when they invaded Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. He did not come from one of the aristocratic families, as many of his fellow officers did. Instead, Yamamoto had earned his position through his skill and his understanding of tactics. The Ayrshire was a Kager-class destroyer, one of the more modern ships Japan had. It was built in 1940, displaced 2,500 tons, and had a crew of 240 men. Her main purpose was to hunt submarines and screen the fleet, but she also carried 6 5-inch guns and 8 torpedo tubes for fighting other ships. By June of 1942, the Ayrshire had been part of nearly every important Japanese naval operation since the attack on Pearl Harbor. Operation Me, the plan to attack Midway Island, was Japan's attempt to finish off what was left of the American Pacific Fleet. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, who was no relation to the commander, had planned the operation as a trap. The Japanese would invade Midway, which would force the Americans to send their ships. Then, the Japanese fleet, being much larger, would destroy them. 4 of Japan's fleet carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Srei, and Hyori, were the main striking force. Destroyers, like the Ayrshire, were there to protect the carriers from submarines. Commander Yamamoto received his orders on the 25th of May, 1942, at Iwo anchorage. The Ayrshire was to sail with the carrier screening force. Her station was to be 2,000 yards ahead of the carrier Hyori. His specific orders were to find and destroy any American submarines that tried to get close to the fleet. The briefing materials noted that American submarines had been acting with more aggression in the past few months. The war in the Pacific was at a turning point. Japan had been victorious in every major battle since December of 1941, but the American air raid on Tokyo in April had been a shock to the high command. The Midway operation was for revenge, but it was also a strategic need. If they could destroy the American carriers, Japan would have control of the seas for at least another year. On May 27, 1942, the Ayrshire left Japan. It was part of a fleet of 185 ships and 28,000 men, the largest naval force Japan had ever assembled. On the way to Midway, Commander Yamamoto drilled his crew. His communications officer, a lieutenant named Kenji Sat, wrote in his diary that the commander seemed unusually quiet during the voyage. He spent hours looking at charts of the Southeast Asian archipelago, Sat wrote, especially the coastlines of British Malaya. The weather was poor as they approached Midway. There was heavy cloud cover, which made it difficult for the carrier's search planes, and the seas were rough, making refueling a hard business. On June 3rd, the fleet was told that American patrol planes had seen the invasion force on its way to Midway. The surprise was lost. But the Japanese commanders continued on, believing their superior numbers would ensure victory. What they did not know was that American codebreakers had read their entire plan. They did not know that 3 American carriers were already in position, northeast of Midway, waiting for them. And none of them, especially not Commander Yamamoto, could have known that the events of the next 48 hours would change everything. At 4:30 in the morning on June 4, 1942, the Arisher was at her screening position, 2,000 yards ahead of the Hyori. Commander Yamamoto was on the bridge as his men went to their battle stations. The 4 Japanese carriers started to launch their first wave of planes to attack Midway Island. 108 aircraft flew east, into the dark before the dawn. The sonar operator on the Arisher reported hearing several contacts that morning, but they all turned out to be pods of whales, disturbed by the passage of so many ships. Yamamoto kept his radio silent, using signal flags and blinker lights to communicate with the carrier group. At 7:28, things changed. American dive bombers from Midway Island attacked the fleet. Their attack was not coordinated, and it accomplished nothing. The Japanese fighter patrols shot most of them down. On the bridge of the Arisher, the officers watched the fight in the air. The American planes seemed to be making desperate, poorly planned attacks. At 9:20, the Arashi's sonar operator got a clear submarine contact. It was bearing 045 degrees, at a range of 3,000 yards. Commander Yamamoto turned his ship to attack at once. For the next 2 hours, the Arisher dropped depth charges on the American submarine, the USS Nautilus. Yamamoto used 18 depth charges, dropping them in patterns meant to crush the submarine's hull. The sea boiled white with each explosion. But this attack had a fatal consequence. While Yamamoto was chasing the submarine, the Arisher was left behind by the carrier formation. By 10:15, she was 8 miles behind the main fleet, sailing at full speed to catch up. The destroyer's bow threw up a great wave as she moved at 34 knots, leaving a long, straight wake behind her. At 10:22, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, who was leading 37 American dive bombers from the carrier Enterprise, was low on fuel. He was searching for the Japanese fleet and had found nothing. Then he saw the wake of the Arisher, a white line on the ocean pointing directly toward the Japanese carriers. The radar operator on the Arisher saw the American planes at 10:24. Commander Yamamoto immediately sent a radio warning to the fleet. Enemy dive bombers were approaching from the northeast. The message was received by the Hyori and logged at 10:25. It was the last confirmed message sent by Commander Yamamoto. What happened then took place in 5 minutes. At 10:26, the American dive bombers began their attack on the carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Srei. The Japanese fighter patrol planes were flying at a low altitude, having just destroyed an American torpedo bomber attack. The dive bombers met almost no resistance. The crew of the Arisher could only watch as bombs struck all 3 carriers. Great explosions tore the ships apart as fuel and armed aircraft on their decks caught fire. The Kaga was hit 4 times, and the fires could not be controlled. The Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, was hit at least twice, and the bombs set fire to the fueled planes in her hangar deck. Commander Yamamoto steered the Arisher toward the burning Kaga, intending to pull alongside and rescue the survivors. At 10:45, he received new orders from the Hyori, the only Japanese carrier still able to fight. The Arisher was to continue her anti-submarine patrol, to stop any American submarines from finishing off the burning carriers. All afternoon, Yamamoto watched as his country's naval power was destroyed. The Kaga turned over and sank at 7:25 in the evening. The Srei sank at 7:13. The Akagi, which had been kept afloat by her damage control crews, was finally sunk by Japanese destroyers at 5 in the morning on the next day. The Arisher spent those hours pulling men from the oil-covered water. Her crew rescued 221 sailors, finding space for them wherever they could on the destroyer. At 5:03 that afternoon, the last Japanese carrier, The Hyori, launched an attack that damaged the American carrier Yorktown. But American dive bombers found the Hyori at 5 o'clock and put 4 bombs into her. By that evening, all 4 of Japan's fleet carriers were sinking or had already sunk. Admiral Yamamoto ordered the entire fleet to withdraw at 2:55 on the morning of June 5. The Arisher, filled with survivors and low on fuel, turned west. Her war diary shows that she performed her normal duties during the retreat, keeping her station, moving wounded men to larger ships, and writing up damage reports. On June 7, 1942, the Arisher reached Hashirojima anchorage. The survivors were taken ashore. The ship's log shows that Commander Takashi Yamamoto signed off on the final approach to the harbor at 3:40 in the afternoon. After that, there was nothing. No more entries from him, no orders for a transfer, no record of a promotion or a demotion. Japanese naval records show the Arisher stayed in port for 3 weeks for some minor repairs. But there is no mention of Commander Yamamoto after June 7, 1942. His family was told he had died in August of 1942. The official reason given was that he was killed in action during the Battle of Midway. His name was added to the memorial wall at the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, with the thousands of other sailors who were lost in the battle. But Commander Yamamoto had not died at Midway. What he did in the months after the battle would stay hidden for 82 years. The reason for Yamamoto's disappearance would only become clear when investigators began to look at what else was hidden in that villa in Malaysia. What they found suggested it was not just one man's escape. It was something much bigger. The official list of casualties for the Imperial Japanese Navy from the Battle of Midway was 47 pages long. It listed 3,057 dead. Pilots, aircrew, sailors, and officers. Commander Takashi Yamamoto's name was on page 23, among the destroyer personnel who were killed in action. The entry gave no details of how or when he had died. It simply said, died in battle Midway, June 4 to 7, 1942. His wife, Akiko Yamamoto, received the usual military notification at their home in Yokosuka on August 12, 1942. The telegram said her husband had died a hero's death in the defense of the empire, and that his personal effects would be returned when it was possible. 2 weeks later, a naval officer came to their home and gave her a small box. Inside was Yamamoto's graduation sword from the Naval Academy and a bundle of letters. The officer told Akiko that her husband's body had been lost at sea. The Yamamoto family held a Buddhist funeral for him on August 30, 1942. 47 of Commander Yamamoto's old shipmates were there. His younger brother, Hiroshi, accepted a posthumous promotion to captain in his name, a standard honor given to officers who were killed in action. The family received a small pension and a certificate, signed by Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku himself, praising the commander's service. But there were things in the official story that did not seem right, almost from the start. Lieutenant Kenji Sat, the Arashi's communications officer and a close friend of Yamamoto's, was one of the survivors. He came to the funeral, and he told Hiroshi Yamamoto something strange. "I saw your brother alive at Hashirojima on June 8, he said. He seemed distracted. He told me he had been given special duties and could not talk about it." Hiroshi wrote this conversation down in his private diary, but he did not question the official notice of death. In Japan during the war, it was dangerous and useless to question military records. If the Navy said his brother died at Midway, then he had died at Midway. The crew list for the Arisher from June 1942 was another source of confusion. The ship had returned to Hashirojima with 240 crewmen, as well as the 221 survivors from Midway. But the manifest that was logged on June 7 showed only 239 crew members. One man was missing, Commander Yamamoto, but no report of his death was filed, and no investigation was started. It was as if the Navy had expected him to be gone. 3 other officers from the Arisher, besides Lieutenant Sat, remembered seeing Yamamoto alive after the battle. An ensign named Takahashi wrote about it in a letter to his family, dated June 10, 1942. The letter, which was found in his family's papers in 1995, said, "Commander Yamamoto left the ship yesterday with 2 men from Naval Intelligence. We were given no explanation. American censors intercepted this letter, and it was put in a classified file at the National Archives, where it stayed until it was declassified. In December of 1942, the Erasure was given a new commanding officer, a Commander Ishii. Naval records show there was no formal ceremony for the change of command. There were no orders transferring Yamamoto to a new post. There was no mention of what had happened to the previous commander. Ishii's name simply appeared on the roster one day. The Yamamoto family tried to get more information about how he had died in 1944. As the war was turning against Japan, the Navy's Bureau of Personnel sent them a short reply. It said, "Commander Yamamoto's service record is classified for security reasons. No more information can be provided." After Japan surrendered in 1945, Hiroshi Yamamoto looked for his brother's name in the documents the Americans had captured, thinking that perhaps Takashi had been taken prisoner. He found nothing. He spoke to every surviving crew member of the Erasure he could find. They all said they had seen Yamamoto alive after Midway. None of them knew where he had gone. In 1952, at a reunion of Midway veterans, Lieutenant Sat, who was retired by then, said something startling to some of his old shipmates. According to those who were there, Sat said, "Commander Yamamoto didn't die at Midway. He was recruited for intelligence work in Southeast Asia. I think he is still alive somewhere." The other veterans thought it was just a fantasy, something brought on by grief. The mystery might have ended there, lost in contradictory records and memories that were fading. But in 1978, a British colonial administrator named Malcolm Henderson published a book about his time serving in Malaya during the war. On page 247, Henderson wrote about something odd. In late 1942, he wrote, "Our intelligence network reported that Japanese naval officers were appearing in Kuala Lumpur who were not part of the occupation forces. They seemed to operate on their own. They met with local businessmen and bought property. One of them wore a commander's insignia. Our agents tried to find out who he was, but he disappeared before we could learn more." No one made a connection between Henderson's words and Commander Yamamoto. The book sold 400 copies and was forgotten for 40 years. The mystery of Yamamoto existed only in pieces, in family letters and the scattered memories of veterans. Hiroshi Yamamoto died in 1991, still believing his brother had been lost at Midway. Akiko Yamamoto passed away in 1987. The question of her husband's fate was never answered for her. In 1995, the United States began to declassify thousands of intelligence documents from the Second World War. Among them were intercepted Japanese naval communications from 1942 and 1943. A researcher at the National Archives, Dr. Robert Chun, was cataloging signals intelligence from Southeast Asia when he noticed something unusual. 3 separate radio messages, from August to October of 1942, mentioned a special naval mission in Malaya that was commanded by someone code-named Erasure. The messages were not complete. American codebreakers had only partly broken this particular naval code. But the context suggested that the mission involved gathering intelligence and setting up strategic assets in territory occupied by the Japanese. Dr. Chun published what he found in an academic paper in 1998, with the title Unidentified Japanese Naval Intelligence Operations in Malaya, 1942-1943. The paper noted that Erasure was the name of a destroyer at Midway, but Chun did not connect it to Commander Yamamoto. The paper was cited 14 times by other historians, but none of them looked further into the Malaya connection. Japanese military records remained mostly sealed until the early 2000s. In 2004, the Japanese National Institute for Defense Studies started to digitize its naval archives from the Second World War. A junior researcher, Yuki Tanaka, noticed that Commander Yamamoto's personnel file had been physically taken out of the main filing system. In its place was a note card. It read, "Transferred to Special Archive 7. Classified per 1942 security protocols." Tanaka asked for permission to see Special Archive 7. His request was denied. The archive held sensitive personnel files that were still classified under Japanese law. Tanaka told his supervisor about the strange note, and his supervisor told him to work on research topics that were less problematic. In 2011, a Filipino historian, Dr. Maria Santos, was looking at property records from the Japanese occupation era in Kuala Lumpur. She found that in September of 1942, a Japanese naval officer had bought a 15-acre piece of jungle land 30 miles from the city. The purchase was made through a Chinese go-between, but the British colonial property records, which the Japanese had continued to use, showed the final owner was T. Yamamoto, a commander in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Dr. Santos published her finding in a regional history journal. The article said that this kind of land purchase was not common. Most Japanese officers did not buy land for themselves in the territories they occupied. They simply took what they needed. Santos thought it might have been a private investment, perhaps an illegal one, but she had no way to look into it further. None of these researchers, Chun, Tanaka, and Santos, knew about the work of the others. The pieces of the puzzle were in different places. In American intelligence archives, in Japanese naval records, and in Malaysian property documents. In 2018, Yamamoto's grandson, Kenji Yamamoto, who was named after his grandfather's friend, became interested in his family's history after he found his great-uncle Hiroshi's diary. The parts of the diary that mentioned the confusion about his grandfather's death made him curious. Kenji worked with computers and had no training as a historian. But he had something that professional historians did not. Endless time and a personal reason to search. Kenji spent 2 years looking for every mention of his grandfather he could find. He found Dr. Chen's paper, Dr. Santos' article about the property records, and he even found the surviving daughter of the retired Lieutenant Sat. She had her father's personal diary from 1942. In October of 2020, Kenji put all his findings on a website for Second World War research. He put everything together. The conflicting death records, the accounts from eyewitnesses who saw Yamamoto alive after Midway, the land purchase in Malaya, the intercepted radio signals that mentioned Erasure. He asked a direct question. Did my grandfather fake his death at Midway to run intelligence operations in Southeast Asia? The post was viewed 47,000 times and had 300 comments, mostly from amateur historians. Several researchers from Southeast Asia contacted Kenji with more information. One told him that Malaysian forestry records from the 1950s showed that the same 15-acre property Santos had found was listed as an abandoned structure in a jungle reclamation zone. But no one had ever gone to look for it. The property was far from any town, overgrown, and on land that was now planned for development. It would take a construction accident to find what had been hidden there for 82 years. What that construction crew found in August of 2024 would prove that Kenji Yamamoto had been right. It would reveal an intelligence operation so secret that both the Japanese and American governments had kept it hidden for 8 decades. On the 7th of August, 2024, the Pembangunan Shah Development Corporation started clearing 50 acres of jungle near Hulu Langit, 30 miles from Kuala Lumpur. They were planning to build a complex of homes there. The land had been bought from the Malaysian government 2 years before. Forestry records said that no one had lived in the area since the 1940s. The site foreman, Ahmad Hassan, was watching a Caterpillar D8 bulldozer when its blade struck something solid. At first, I thought we'd found an old concrete bunker from the war, Hassan told investigators later. The Japanese built hundreds of them around here during the occupation. But when the excavator dug away the topsoil with care, what they found was not a bunker. It was the corner of a building. It was a reinforced concrete wall, and the ventilation grills were still in place. Hassan stopped the work at once and called his supervisor. By noon, men from the Malaysian Ministry of Defense had arrived, along with Dr. Liu from the University of Malaya's Archaeology Department. Dr. Liu was cautious at first. We see abandoned structures from the occupation period all the time, she explained. Most of them are just storage sheds, garrison buildings, nothing of historical note. But 3 things made her look closer. The quality of the building's construction was very high. Its location had been chosen to be hidden, and forestry records showed it had been maintained into the 1950s. For the next week, A team of 15 workers dug carefully around the structure. They uncovered a villa of about 2,400 square feet. It was built in a Japanese style, but with building methods suited for the tropics. The foundation was raised to keep out floodwaters. The concrete walls were reinforced to withstand typhoons, and it had a well-designed system for collecting rainwater. The villa had been deliberately hidden. Old photographs showed that many large trees had been planted around it, creating a canopy that would have made the building impossible to see from the air after only a few years. Someone had spent a great deal of money and effort to hide this place. On August 14, 2024, the team made their way through the main entrance. The door was made of steel, not wood, and it was still locked from the inside. A locksmith from Kuala Lumpur worked for 4 hours to open it. When the door finally opened, the investigators were met with air that had not moved in decades. Dr. Liu made everyone wear respirators. The inside had been so well sealed that almost everything was preserved. The main room was furnished in the Japanese style, with low tables, tatami mats, and shoji screens. But the real discovery was in the office area. There was a wooden desk against the far wall. On it was a Toshiba typewriter from the early 1940s, a collection of navigation charts of Southeast Asian waters, and a framed photograph. The photograph was of a Japanese naval officer in his dress uniform, standing on the bridge of a destroyer. Dr. Liu took a picture of the photograph and sent it to naval historians in Japan to be identified. The answer came back in less than a day. The uniform insignia showed that the officer was a commander in the Imperial Japanese Navy, from around 1941 or 1942. The ship in the background looked like a Kager-class destroyer. One historian noted that the officer's face was a match for archive photographs of Commander Takashi Yamamoto, who was officially listed as killed at Midway in June of 1942. In a closet in the bedroom, they found the confirmation. Inside a cedar wardrobe, wrapped in rice paper, was a complete commander's dress uniform of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The name tape sewn inside the collar read Yamamoto. The uniform had no damage, no signs of having been worn in combat. It had been stored with care, as if its owner meant to come back for it one day. But the most important discovery was in a locked steel cabinet, hidden in a secret compartment under the floor. Dr. Liu's team found the compartment on August 19, 2024. After a machine that could see into the ground showed there was a space below the main room. Inside the cabinet were 47 folders. They held documents written in Japanese, English, and Malay. The documents were taken to a secure building run by the Malaysian National Security Council. The first translations showed they were intelligence reports. They were detailed studies of Allied military bases, shipping routes, and defensive preparations in British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines. What made these documents so remarkable was their date range. From August 1942 to March 1943. They had been written months after Commander Yamamoto was supposed to have died at Midway. On August 23, 2024, Dr. Liu found a locked metal box in a drawer of the desk. An X-ray machine showed it held papers. Instead of forcing it open, preservation experts spent 3 days carefully picking the lock. Inside was a personal journal, 200 pages, written by hand in Japanese. The first entry was dated June 15, 1942. The last was dated March 17, 1943. The journal began with a single sentence that explained everything. My death was necessary for the mission to succeed. But the journal told a story that surprised even the seasoned intelligence analysts. Commander Yamamoto had not been working by himself. The documents in that villa laid out a spy network that had reached into the highest levels of the Allied command in Southeast Asia. The Malaysian government at once declared the discovery of the villa a matter of national security. On August 25, 2024, a joint investigation team was created. It was made up of Malaysian intelligence, representatives from the Japanese Ministry of Defense, historical researchers from the American CIA, and archivists from the British MI6. Dr. Liu was kept on as the chief archaeological consultant. The translation of the journal began on August 27, 2024. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, an expert in the Japanese language from Waseda University, was in charge of the translation team. What they read was the most detailed account of a Second World War intelligence operation ever found, told in the first person. Commander Yamamoto's journal started with how he was recruited. According to his entry from June 15, 1942, he had been approached by Captain Minoru Genda of Naval Intelligence on June 8, 1942, the day after the Airshire had returned to Iwo. Genda was direct. The defeat at Midway proves we are losing the intelligence war. We need officers who can disappear and build networks in the territories we occupy. You will be declared dead. Your family will be told you died at Midway. This is permanent. Yamamoto wrote that he asked for a day to think about it. He spent that night walking along the docks at Iwo. His entry from June 9th recorded his decision. I have no children. Akiko is strong enough to live without me. If my death can serve the empire better than my life, then I will die. On June 11, 1942, Yamamoto officially agreed to the mission. Naval Intelligence created a false report of his death and put his name on the list of the Midway dead. His personnel file was sealed. A naval officer brought his sword and personal things to his wife. The change was complete. In the official records, Commander Takashi Yamamoto no longer existed. The journal went on to describe his training at a naval intelligence school near Yokohama. For 3 months, he was taught the skills of espionage, how to trade secrets, how to use couriers, how to use codes, and the languages of Southeast Asia. Yamamoto already spoke English, from when he had been a naval attaché in Singapore in the 1930s. Now, he learned to speak conversational Malay and some basic Chinese. On September 3, 1942, Yamamoto left Japan on a submarine, the I-17. The submarine traveled underwater to Japanese-occupied Malaya, and on September 15th, it surfaced just off Port Klang. Yamamoto went ashore dressed as a civilian. He carried false identity papers that said he was a civilian engineer working for the Japanese military administration. His mission was clear: to set up an intelligence network in Malaya that could watch for Allied preparations for a counteroffensive. The Japanese High Command knew that Allied forces were gathering in India and Australia. They needed to know as early as possible if an offensive was being planned. The journal explained how Yamamoto bought the land near Hulu Langat through a Chinese go-between, the same sale that Dr. Maria Santos had found in the property records. Yamamoto wrote, "The location is perfect. It is remote enough to be secret, but close enough to Kuala Lumpur to stay in contact with people. I will build a headquarters that can survive Allied bombing if the war turns against us." Took 4 months to build the villa. Yamamoto oversaw the work himself. He used local workers but was not specific about the building's purpose. He told them he was building a retreat for Japanese officers. The reinforced walls and the trees planted for camouflage made sense in that context. By February of 1943, Yamamoto had recruited a network of 23 agents. They were Chinese businessmen who resented British colonial rule, Malay nationalists, and Indian independence activists. His journal listed their code names and described what kind of information they could get. An agent codenamed Orchid worked in the British Military Liaison Office in Singapore. An agent codenamed Tiger was a clerk at the Allied headquarters in Ceylon. The intelligence reports that were found in the hidden compartment of the villa came from these agents. They gave details of Allied ship movements through the Strait of Malacca, they identified new airfields being built in India, and they reported on the schedules of British and American reinforcements. Each report showed Yamamoto's careful analysis. He highlighted the important information, threw out rumors, and checked his information from multiple sources. A forensic study of the documents showed they used sophisticated methods to prove they were genuine. Yamamoto used a particular grade of Japanese rice paper that could be verified. Each report was stamped by hand with a unique mark that changed every week. The codes they used matched the codebooks known to have been used by the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1942 and 1943. But the last entries in the journal, from March of 1943, revealed a growing problem. Yamamoto wrote on March 10, "Communications with Tokyo have become irregular. The submarine courier that was supposed to come in February never arrived. I have heard nothing from naval intelligence in 6 weeks. On March 15, 1943, he wrote, radio intercepts suggest a major Allied offensive in the Solomon Islands. If Japan is being pushed back in the Pacific, how long before they come for Malaya? I may be cut off here. The last entry, on March 17, 1943, was short. The situation cannot be sustained. I must make arrangements for the network to carry on if I cannot. The documents must be saved as proof that we tried. Then there was nothing more. The journal ended in the middle of his mission, with no explanation of what happened to Yamamoto. The investigation team looked for more clues in the villa. In a small storage room, they found signs that someone had left in a hurry. There were clothes left in drawers, tins of food in the pantry, and a letter on the desk that was only half written. The letter was to Akiko, but it was not finished. It started, "If you are reading this, then I have failed. I am sorry for the deceit. I am sorry for leaving you alone." Forensic analysis of the villa showed when it had last been occupied. Pollen samples taken from the floor were from March or April of 1943, which matched the dates in the journal. The way the dust had settled suggested that the building had been sealed shortly after that time and had never been opened again. On September 3, 2024, the investigation team made a troubling discovery. Using the machine that could see under the ground, they scanned the area around the villa. They found something 50 meters into the jungle. It was a dense spot under the soil that was not natural. When they dug there, they found a grave. The remains were of a single person who had been buried about 80 years before. Forensic anthropologists said the remains were of a man, between 35 and 45 years old. His height was consistent with the average for Japanese men of that time. The body had been buried with military honors. It was laid out formally with the hands crossed and facing north toward Japan. More importantly, a corroded metal identification tag was found with the remains. It had a serial number that matched the Imperial Japanese Navy's records for Commander Takashi Yamamoto. They tried to get DNA, but after 80 years, the remains were too degraded for a conclusive identification. However, an analysis of the isotopes in the teeth and bones suggested that the person had spent most of his life in Japan, which was consistent with Yamamoto's life story. The investigation team concluded that Commander Yamamoto had died sometime in March or April of 1943, at his villa in Hulu Langat. They could not determine the cause of death from the skeleton. There were no signs of injury or violence. But one question was still unanswered. If Yamamoto died in early 1943, who buried him with military honors in the jungle? And why did both Japanese and Allied intelligence agencies keep this operation a secret for 82 years? The answer came from a place no one expected. On September 10, 2024, after the news about the villa was made public, a 97-year-old man in Osaka contacted the investigation team through the Japanese consulate in Kuala Lumpur. His name was Kenji Sat, the same communications officer who had served under Commander Yamamoto on the Ayrshire. Sat had been silent for 82 years. Now, at the end of his life, he was ready to speak. In an interview that was recorded on video at his nursing home, Sat explained what had happened. In March of 1943, he had been a communications officer at the Japanese Naval Headquarters in Singapore when he received an urgent, coded message. The message was from Commander Yamamoto's network in Malaya. Orchid compromised. Network collapse imminent. Commander ill. Require immediate extraction. Sat, who was still loyal to his former captain, traveled himself to the villa near Hulu Langat. He arrived on March 22, 1943. He traveled undercover, pretending to be a civilian engineer. What he found there was a great shock to him. Commander Yamamoto was dying of cerebral malaria. In the tropics, without proper medical care, the disease had destroyed him. He was delirious, going in and out of consciousness. 2 of his Chinese agents were taking care of him, but they had no medicine and no way to take him to a hospital without revealing the entire operation. Sat stayed for 4 days. On March 26, 1943, Commander Yamamoto died. His last words, according to Sat, were, Tell Akiko I never stopped loving her. Tell her my death at Midway was real. She must never know the truth. Sat and the two Chinese agents buried Yamamoto in the jungle behind the villa. They held a simple Buddhist ceremony. Sat placed Yamamoto's identification tag with the body, even though he knew it might one day lead to him being found. He deserved to be found someday, Sat told the investigators. He deserved to have his real grave, not just a name on a memorial. After the burial, Sat sealed the villa. He took the most secret documents back to Singapore and destroyed them. But he left the journal and the intelligence reports hidden in the villa, thinking that they might one day be a historical record of Yamamoto's sacrifice. Sat went back to his regular naval duties. He survived the war and never spoke of what had happened. When the researchers asked him why he had stayed silent for so long, he answered, Commander Yamamoto's last wish was that his wife never know he had survived Midway. I kept that promise. But Sat's story only answered part of the mystery. Why had Allied intelligence never revealed Yamamoto's network? Why had they let the villa remain undiscovered? The answer was found in declassified British intelligence files that were released on September 15, 2024. British codebreakers had actually intercepted and decrypted Yamamoto's intelligence reports as he sent them, all through 1942 and 1943. They knew about his network, they knew about the villa, and they knew exactly what he was doing. But they made a calculated choice not to arrest him. Instead, they used double agents to feed him false information. The intelligence that Yamamoto thought he was sending to Tokyo about Allied troop movements, invasion plans, and reinforcement schedules was all a carefully constructed deception. A note in the British files from March 1943 said, Source erasure has ceased transmission. Assume natural causes or discovery by Japanese authorities. Network was useful for deception operations but has now served its purpose. No action required. The British knew Yamamoto had died but saw no reason to investigate. His network had been compromised from the very beginning. The villa's location was noted in colonial records but was left alone. After the war, as British Malaya moved toward independence, the files were classified and then forgotten. The last piece of the story came from the Japanese National Defense Archives, which were opened specifically for this investigation. Documents there showed that naval intelligence had lost contact with Yamamoto in February of 1943 because of submarine losses in the Pacific. By March 1943, the situation in the war had become so bad that the mission was effectively abandoned. When Sat reported Yamamoto's death, naval intelligence made another calculated choice: to keep him officially listed as dead from Midway. To open an investigation would be to expose the entire intelligence operation, which could compromise other networks. It was better to let Commander Yamamoto remain a casualty of Midway. The evidence was all there. Commander Takashi Yamamoto had faked his death at Midway, run intelligence operations in Malaya for 9 months, and died of malaria in March 1943. His network had been compromised by British intelligence, which meant that his sacrifice was, in the end, for nothing. Both sides had good reasons to bury the truth, and so they did, for 82 years. On October 1, 2024, Commander Takashi Yamamoto's remains were brought back to Japan. His grandson, Kenji Yamamoto, was with the coffin on the flight from Kuala Lumpur to Tokyo. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force held a full military funeral with honors. Akiko Yamamoto never found out that her husband had survived Midway. She died in 1987, believing the story the Navy had told her in 1942. Some might call that a tragedy. Lieutenant Sat, in his final interview, called it a mercy. She mourned once, he said. Why make her mourn twice? The villa near Hulu Langat has been preserved as a historical site. The Malaysian government worked with Japanese and British historians to create a museum. It tells not just Yamamoto's story, but the story of the whole shadow war of intelligence operations that was fought in Southeast Asia during the Second World War. The 23 agents Yamamoto recruited were identified from his journal. Most of them died during the war. Some were executed by the Japanese authorities after the network was shut down. Others were killed when the British invaded Malaya in 1945. 3 of them lived to see their country's independence. None of them ever knew that the intelligence they gathered had been compromised. The history books record the Battle of Midway as one of the most decisive naval battles in history. 5 minutes of American dive bombing changed the course of the Pacific War. But for Commander Yamamoto, Midway was only the beginning of a different kind of war, one that was fought in shadows and jungles, in sealed villas where even death could be a deception. His uniform still hangs in that villa, perfectly preserved. The museum left it exactly where it was found. It is a reminder that wars create casualties that we never count. The men who die twice, once for the record and once for real, their sacrifices are buried so deep that even their families never learn the truth. Kenji Yamamoto visits the grave once a year. He brings flowers and sake, the traditional offerings. But he also brings something else. Copies of his grandfather's letters to Akiko, the ones he wrote before Midway, when their love was still a simple thing, and the lies had not yet begun. Sometimes the hardest part of history is not in the forgetting, but in the remembering.